everyone and welcome back to my channel. So thank you all for your comments. I'll try and do a comments video at some point. In the meantime, I'll just try and reply to as many as I can in the comment section, but I will try and do a video on them at some point. It might just take a bit of time because I've got quite a lot to cover, but keep on commenting and I'll get to your comments in due course. So I just wanted to carry on going through the Christine McGuinness documentary from where I left off. So, in the next part of the documentary, Christine McGuinness looks at autism diagnosis and specifically the ADOS test. Now, the ADOS test was created in 2001 before any extensive research have been done into so-called female autism. Again, those big air quotes, because like I said, I feel it's a problematic term. Is there such a thing? But anyway, 3 doctors at King's College have been researching how to improve the test to help clinicians spot more subtle signs of autism in women. Now, the ADOS test, by the way, stands for Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, and it's seen as the gold standard because it's designed to elicit behaviour that will tell the assessor about the person's autism. But interestingly, by the way, and this wasn't talked about in the programme, the ADOS is not actually used in every single diagnosis. It seems to be a bit of a postcode lottery. Not all clinicians use the ADOS. It has been highly critiqued, not just because it might fail to pick up subtler manifestations, but also because, although it is meant to be age-specific, tailored to the age of the person, some people have found the ADOS to be rather infantilising. I think, for example, they sometimes give them a story to look at, and sometimes the story that they're given is kind of almost like a children's book I've read. I don't think I wasn't given the ADOS. The ADOS wasn't used when I got diagnosed. The person diagnosing me, the first person I saw, because I first of all saw a clinical nurse specialist before seeing a multidisciplinary team made up of a psychiatrist, speech and language therapist, psychologist, and psychologist. But before that, I saw a clinical nurse specialist, and I think they used the, if I remember, such a long time ago now, I think he used the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases, which was the old edition, and I think they used both that and the DSM. I think they actually used both, so they kind of cross-referenced from both, and he also did the kind of interview of my parents and myself, and also because I already had information from school, like when I had the neuropsychological testing when I was at school, which meant I didn't have to go through any cognitive testing because it had already been done when I was at school, and that was very informative, and obviously lent support to the diagnosis. So the ADOS wasn't actually used when I got assessed. Let me know if any of you have experienced the ADOS. It does seem rather strange that it's not used in every single assessment. I sort of feel that autism diagnosis should be more standardised because everyone should receive the same test, otherwise it's a bit weird if you ask me, and a bit ad hoc, but that's my own opinion. I do feel it needs to be a lot more standardised. But anyway, so the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, that's designed to elicit behaviour that tells the clinician about autism. So Christine McGuinness met someone called Dr. Emma Colvert, who specialises in female autism. She also met Dr. Victoria Milner, who's a doctoral researcher, and Hannah Hayward, who's a neurodevelopmental specialist. And they talked about how as people get older, they sometimes put strategies in place to cope. So they might respond to the ADOS, for example, in a subtler way. They also have noticed themes around friendships and relationships, And what they've noticed is a common theme that they've noticed, in particularly in autistic women, is a vulnerability in friendships. And there's often a history of domestic and sexual violence. That was a very big theme in the documentary, by the way. This, along with eating disorders, it was also flagged up for domestic and sexual violence as a particular theme for autistic women. And there was a statistic that 9 out of 10 women have experienced domestic and sexual. Sorry, one of the women that Christine interviewed, I can't remember what one it was, but one of the autism researchers or clinicians, because she interviewed 3 of them, I can't remember what one it was, who said that 9 out of 10 women that she works with had experienced a history of domestic and sexual violence. That's a very high number, obviously. And then Christine talked about how she had experienced this and she never spoke up. That she was raped as a teenager before she met her husband. And then she talked about staying with her husband as it's safe and she doesn't like change. Now, obviously, I've had a very insular, sheltered existence. I've never experienced sexual abuse. I've never experienced any of that. Can't call me lucky, I guess, but I guess because I have led a very sheltered life. I mean, I don't get out much. I don't really have any. I've never been in a relationship. Maybe that's one of the benefits of never being in a relationship if you're autistic. So yeah, that is a very high number of women. Also, I am gay. I'm a lesbian, so that might feed into it as well. Like, yeah, maybe. But But obviously, it's my autism that's behind the reason why I've never really had relationships. That's because of my autism, obviously. Christine then goes to Limpsfield Grange, which is an autism girls' school. They often seem to go to Limpsfield Grange. It seems to be featured in pretty much every single autism programme these days, which is an autism girls' school. It's the only school in the UK that caters for autistic girls who are autistic. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. Autistic girls who are autistic? That doesn't make sense, does it? Obviously they're autistic. Well, my brain's not working. My brain sometimes does weird stuff like that. Autistic girls. It's the only school in the UK that caters for autistic girls, Limpsfield Grange, and it's in Surrey. I think it's a local authority school, so it's not a private school or anything. It's a maintained school, so yeah, it's part of a local authority. It's not private. And I think a lot of the girls who've been to that school were previously at mainstream schools, so most of them were at mainstream schools before they went to Limpsfield Grange, and they all have, I guess, what previously would have been called Asperger's. I don't think it caters for those who are like non-verbal or have severe intellectual disabilities or anything. Most of them, I think, have Asperger's or would have had Asperger's. So she goes there and she enters a lesson on consent in relationships. Christine enters a lesson on consent in relationships and saying no, in relationships, saying no to unwanted demands or whatever. So the girls were shown having a lesson. And then Christine talks a little bit more about her own abuse, get it started when she was 9 years old, and then she wonders if an earlier diagnosis and more support at school would have helped. And then Francesca Happe, who I mentioned earlier, Francesca Happe, who's a lead autism expert from the UK, she's interviewed again, and she says that an autistic in a neurotypical world can be really vulnerable, as they don't expect people to lie or cheat them, and now autistic women have a whole extra layer of vulnerability. For example, they might believe what they see on TV as being real, and that can make them even more vulnerable. And then she also interviews Sarah Wilde, who's a head teacher at Limpsfield Grange, and she talks about how girls have different pressures to boys. Often boys are not trying to have those friendships, and so they might not, girls just have different pressures sort of thing, so she talks about that. And also Christine talks to some of the girls at Limpsfield Grange. As I said, some of them went to mainstream before going there. One of them said, for example, that nobody understood her properly when she was at mainstream, and everyone thought she was weird, but at Limpsville Grange she's not alone anymore. And I know one of you in your comments previously wanted my own views on special schools, and I will get on to that. There might have to be another video though, but I haven't forgotten. That's a whole other debate in itself, and obviously it's a very complex topic. And then finally, at the end of the documentary, Christine McGuinness meets up with Melissa again, the woman I mentioned earlier who was diagnosed in her 30s, the one who has 2 children. 2 autistic children who are also autistic, and an autistic husband. And Melissa introduces Christine to a group of mums who are all autistic and have autistic kids, and the mums meet up while their kids go off to play. They all meet up to have a kind of group chat, and then Christine says that the other women are just like her and actually didn't feel the need to fit in at the group or anything, or try to pretend when she was at the group that Melissa has, and that's where the documentary sort of came to an end. When I saw that bit, I was thinking they're like completely different. Like, I wouldn't actually feel at home there at all. Like, I wouldn't fit in a group like that. Aside from the fact I don't have any kids, obviously, so I wouldn't have that in common. But like, even if I did have kids, which obviously I don't, and I wouldn't be able to have them anyway. But even if I did have kids, I wouldn't feel like I belonged in a group like that. Like, it would be too sensory overwhelming. I would switch off. I wouldn't find it interesting. It would be too. I wouldn't like to be in a group of people like that. It's not where I feel like. It's not. I wouldn't enjoy it, because I know like quite a lot of autistic people say that they find it easier to get on with like other autistic people. For me, I don't find that at all. Like, I get on with people on a case-by-case basis, so it's irrelevant whether or not they're autistic as to whether or not I get on with them. And in actual fact, it seems more likely I'll get on with a non-autistic person, just because, like, if you think about it, a non-autistic person has better social skills, like, so they can kind of hold the conversation and stuff, and it doesn't, I don't know, and I just find it easier sometimes. And obviously it depends on the non-autistic person, and it really does depend on the person. But I do find that with a very special kind of non-autistic person, and it's only a minority of people who are like this, by the way. Most people I just cannot really tolerate being around for very long. But as autistic or non-autistic, I just can't tolerate being around people full stop that long. But there's a very small minority of people, and they do tend to be non-autistic. They're non-autistic, but they just seem to get the autistic experience. I don't know, maybe they've got like super empathy or something, and they're really good at like socialising, and they're able to make me feel comfortable, and they're really, really rare people, and it's like literally all of these people, by the way, have been support staff, which is interesting. And I think the reason why I can tolerate that type of interaction more is because, in a sense, it's not reciprocal. Like, essentially, I'm the one in control. Like, I call for shots in a way. It's very rule-bound and within a very tight structure, and it's just centred around me, and I don't have to, like, reciprocate. It doesn't really put too much of a demand on, like, social skills in the same way, because they're there to support me, essentially, and they're neurotypical, so they can kind of hold the conversation. They know how to, like, make it so it's not awkward. I can talk about my special interests if I want to my heart's content. It's less sensorily overwhelming because it's just me and one other person who's holding a conversation. It's scaffolded, essentially. It's the same sort of thing to how some autistic little kids are actually pretty okay when they're with adults, because the adults scaffold a conversation, and it's not reciprocal. Like, if you think about it, like, say an autistic, 4-year-old who's, say, with their grandmother is kind of like going out of her way to kind of meet the child, to kind of, meet the child's needs, as it were. The child doesn't really have to reciprocate much. The social stuff is completely led, it's controlled, it's structured. That child isn't going to appear so obviously disabled to say they would in a peer group around their same age peers. They'll still, like, if they're like, they'll still show signs of their autism. The signs of autism can't be hidden, but like, it's going to be, the child's going to find it a lot easier in that situation is not going to, which is why, by the way, when they assess autism, a good assessor will want to find out how the child interacts with their peers, because that is the key. It is peer group interaction. I really struggled with peer group interaction. That was what was flagged in my report, particularly with her peer group. But it's actually quite significant because I read about this in some books about autism as well, that it is, in autism, it is the peer group where the problems are most found. That's in a way where you can draw a very clear, where it can be, what am I trying to say? So basically a shy child, or a child who has a social difficulty that isn't autistic, you're not going to see that discrepancy in the same way. In autism, the child might be like really a lot more comfortable, say, playing with younger children. It's the preference that the child has. So the child might play a lot more with younger children. And obviously autism's got nothing to do with shyness. In actual fact, it's often the complete opposite. Often autistic children are like, not always because it depends on the child, but often actually very inappropriate. You know what I mean? It's very different to shyness, you know. Obviously you can be autistic, can be shy, but it's very obviously different. Very different. I wasn't shy at all when I was a child. I lacked confidence, but I wasn't shy. And I think the lacking in confidence was more around like feeling overwhelmed more than anything, and confused, but I was not a shy child, far from it. I was very inappropriate. But yeah, so struggling with peers is a big autism flag. So I was saying that me being able to interact comparatively well, or where my problems are less obvious, say with support workers, is because just like that 4-year-old autistic child with their grandmother, the support worker is almost like, it's not my peer, is it? Even if now they might be the same age as me, and I've had support workers of a similar age, they're still not my peers. They're there to support me. It's not the same interaction style. It's almost like they are being, in very comments, real adults. You know what I mean? A real adult. I don't feel like an adult most of the time, but you know what I mean? A real adult. And they're like taking me by the hand and like scaffolding, and I'm completely in control. I can talk about whatever I want to talk about. It's all I'm the one leading the shots, you know, and I love that. It's not reciprocal. But in a group scenario, it's completely different. Then I'm out at sea. Then I just get flustered. I can't take it. There's too many demands. I can't reciprocate. I can't steer the conversation. I'm not in control. I don't like it. And it doesn't matter whether I'm with autistic people or non-autistic people. It's still the same thing. So I do not connect better with autistics than I do with non-autistics. It depends a lot of the time on the person. And I would say that on average, on balance, it's actually the other way around. I have a slight preference for non-autistic people, but only a very small minority of non-autistic people who are very special because they just know how to interact with me, and they're a very small minority of people, and they're nearly always support staff. Again, because they're not my peers, they're kind of, you know, it's not quite the same type of relationship, is it? You know what I mean? Okay, so moving on to video number 2. I don't know where this next video is going to go really, because I haven't really planned this properly, but I just might want to just talk a little bit more about Christine McGuinness documentary and some of my thoughts. So moving on to video number 2 now.